Hello and welcome back to the world of psychology. Delay of gratification, nature or nurture? Or are Americans and Catholics less patient? After we have heard in the last episodes that the ability to delay gratifications, do I go for the one marshmallow right now or do I wait to get the second marshmallow, seems to be important not only for academic performance but also for social competence and coping abilities. And furthermore, some studies, especially with adolescents, link the ability to delay gratification with drug abuse or even ADHD. After having heard about all this evidence, one might ask for sure, well, but is there anything we can do about it? Or is it all in our genes and hardwired in our brain, so it doesn't really matter what we do? Well, the studies we're going to talk about today and in the next episodes teach us that nurture plays an important role. For example, culture seems to make a difference. And the first study on this topic I want to introduce to you is the study by Kim, Sung and McClure, The Neural Basis of Cultural Differences in Delay Discounting, published in the journal Philosophical Transactions of the Royal Society. And they hypothesized that people from Western cultures are less patient than people from Eastern cultures, because on average they are differently raised. For example, think about it, in Western cultures we have the idea of time is money, and live in the moment. We are more present oriented, whereas in Eastern cultures, especially the Confucian philosophy is quite influential. So patience and perseverance are much more emphasized. They have sayings like, it takes 10 years to grow a tree and 100 years to educate a person, or dripping water can penetrate stone. So one could hypothesize that the different cultural attitudes manifest in a delay of gratification task. And to observe the cultural differences between Western cultures and Eastern cultures, Kim and colleagues had thousands of participants from every Western and every Eastern country. No, they did not. That was a lie. When I read the study, and the title of the study says, "We observe cultural differences in delay discounting," I really thought they would have thousands of participants, because if you want to compare cultures, well, maybe you need to have many participants. But in this study, they only had, and I was a little bit shocked, they only had 14 American students and 19 Korean students to compare the cultures. Well, usually at this point I stop reading a study. And the only reason I'm reporting the study results to you, after all, is that there have been, well, similar results in the past. So this study is a replication of some results, and what they did was to ask participants to think about different scenarios. For example, well, if you could decide, would you go for $17 right now, or would you decide for about $26 in 2 weeks? You can think about it for a moment. What would you do? Would you go for the $17 right now or for $26 in 2 weeks? The American participants in the study decided for the instant gratification. They wanted to have the $17 right now. They didn't want to wait. Whereas the Korean students were more often willing to wait for the future gratification. The difference between these two cultures, in fact, it's just two countries, the difference were really big, but as I said, you have to keep in mind the sample size was very small, and therefore I suppose that the effect was clearly overrated. I wouldn't expect such a huge effect in general. Another reason why I'm reporting you these results is, besides the fact that it's a very new study, another reason is that the participants, while answering these questions, were lying in a brain scanner. So their brain activation could be observed during these tasks. And in fact, this is the reason why they had only a small number of participants, because these studies with brain scanners are very expensive. And they found that the area of the brain that seems to be responsible for the cultural differences is not the prefrontal cortex, which is commonly known as the area for self-control. In this study, the area of the brain that was highly active was the ventral striatum, an area that has been associated with basic reward and motivational processes. So maybe the differences between Koreans and Americans were not due to self-control, but more due to emotional responsivity. Probably Americans really have a preference for the instant gratification, whereas Koreans see higher value in bigger future gratifications. Nevertheless, some might say that's no evidence for cultural influences on the ability to delay gratification at all, because maybe their brains were all different from the beginning. Maybe the Korean gene pool leads to a brain hardware that prefers future gratifications. And their whole culture, their philosophy, their thinking is just an expression of their genetic programming. Well, that's a really good point. But the next study, which I really love, by the way, it's a great study, but the next study speaks against this hypothesis. It's the study by Chen and colleagues, published in 2011 in the Journal of Market Research, and the title of the study is Cultural Differences in Consumer Impatience. In their study, they conducted 2 experiments with, all in all, 309 bicultural, so-called bicultural participants that were students from Singapore who were influenced by their own traditional culture, but who also got to know via internet, television, radio, etc., the American culture, the American way of life. And with these bicultural participants, they conducted 2 priming experiments. If you've already listened to other episodes of the podcast, You know that I'm really excited about priming experiments because they really show us how our brain works, how associative thinking works, even if we are not aware of it. So in short, in priming experiments, experimenters try to activate certain networks in the brain of the participant without him noticing it. And as these networks are activated, the participants, that's the hypothesis, should behave differently in a following task, of which they think it's not at all linked to the task they worked at before. So in this study, the experimenters tried to activate the American culture network in the brain of the participants by showing them different pictures of the American culture, like the Statue of Liberty, Mickey Mouse, the Lincoln Memorial, Marilyn Monroe, etc. And they told them, well, it's a memory test. Try to remember as many pictures as possible. And in fact, the participants were really tested, so they really had to write down what they had seen before. And after that, they were told, well, there is another experiment for you. Here we have an online shop and an interesting book for you. But there are two options how this book can be delivered to you. You can either choose the standard delivery, which costs $2.99, and you will get the book on average in 5 days, or you can go for the 1-day delivery, so you will have the book the next day. But just tell me, how much would you pay for this 1-day delivery? And surprisingly, the participants that had to solve a memory test with icons of the American cultures were willing to pay on average $8.30, whereas participants that were shown pictures of their own culture, pictures of the culture of Singapore, they were only willing to pay $6.50. So this was a really huge effect just by activating different cultures and ideas in their brain. And in fact, I wonder if this would work with me as well. And if it works with you, maybe we get impatient when we are presented with pictures of Western culture. And maybe we get more patient if we see pictures of Eastern culture. So if you are a psychology student and you are still looking for a topic for your bachelor or master thesis, try to replicate those results because they are really interesting and surprising to me, and I wonder if this works with other participants as well. That it works with bicultural students from Singapore was shown for a second time in their second experiment, which they conducted because they hypothesized that some skeptics might say, well, maybe it's all about consumerism. Maybe these American pictures make you willing to spend more. So in the second experiment, they changed some variables. They exchanged consumer-related pictures for both groups, and they didn't ask how much the participants were willing to spend for the 1-day delivery, but they asked for the impatience directly. So, for example, they had an item like, and now I quote from the study, "Right now, I would like to get a copy of the novel as quickly as possible." And then you had to say, I agree, no, I don't agree, etc. And again, the US prime, the activation of the American culture made participants less patient. They really wanted to have the book right now. So this study design, this priming design, excludes the possibility of different brains, and it tells us that culture really seems to have an influence on patience and impatience in delay of gratification scenarios. If culture is of importance, what about religion? Does it make any difference whether I'm an atheist, an Catholic, Calvinist, or an Buddhist? And maybe or probably some cultural effects are effects of religion. One nice study, and the last study for today, was published by Paglieri and colleagues in 2013 in the journal Psychological Research, and I really like the title of the study, Heaven Can Wait: How Religion Modulates Temporal Discounting. In this study, they compared 89 Dutch students, of which one half were atheists and the other half were Calvinists, with 90 Italian students, which were either atheists or Catholics. Again, participants were given different scenarios. Would you either choose $25 right now, or would you prefer to get $30 after 25 days? And of course, the numbers varied from item to item to be able to calculate a discount rate. First of all, they found a culture effect or a country effect. Italian students were less willing to delay gratification than Dutch students, but the difference between the two countries was explained by religion. So between the Italian atheists and the Dutch atheists was no significant difference. The biggest difference was observed between the Italian Catholics and the Dutch Calvinists. So it seems like the cultural differences were driven by the religion in the country. But why should Calvinists be more patient than Catholics? Well, maybe because the Calvinist religion emphasizes the importance of hard work. It's already clear who is chosen by God. They have the idea of predestination. But if you work really hard, and this includes the idea of being patient, this is a sign that you are probably among the chosen ones. So, to sum this up, whether we go for the instant gratification or the bigger gratification in the future is probably not just hardwired in our genes, but also depends on nurture. And besides culture and religion, there are of course also other influence factors which we will cover in the next episodes.